They were buried facing east, as if to wait for resurrection. But the sky above New Haven never opened. In 1871, the church declared the land sacred. In 1913, they sealed it with concrete and never spoke again. This is not a cemetery. It is a mistake waiting to be uncovered. The wind comes first low and constant, like a breath through teeth. It curls over the hilltop, dragging the smell of damp iron and wet moss, brushing the tall yellow grass flat as if in reverence. In 1853, the Diocese of New Haven purchased the land. They called it Providence Hill, a soft name for a hard place. Elevated, unshaded, and raw, it overlooked the city's edge like a scab refusing to heal. There were no homes nearby, no trees, no animals, just miles of jagged field and a single narrow road that ended nowhere. The land was cheap. Too cheap it had failed as farmland. No crops lasted more than a season. Livestock refused to graze, and those that did were found bloated and glassy-eyed, with tongues blackened and twisted. But the church wasn't planting crops. They had a different purpose. The cemetery was never meant for the pious. The city's cathedrals already had their crypts, marble-lined and blessed with incense. Providence Hill would be different. It would hold the rejected, men who died in prison, women who perished during childbirth out of wedlock, sailors drowned while carrying blasphemous cargo, children never baptized, those whose last rites were never spoken. It would be watched, guarded, sanctified through proximity to the cloth. The bishop at the time, Elias Godfrey, called it an act of compassion. But compassion wasn't what the builders found. Construction began in late September. 12 men were hired to dig foundation trenches for the chapel and ossuary. Within a week, 5 had left. They said nothing, simply refused to return. The rest kept quiet, but records from the parish archives show delays, sudden tremors in the ground, tools lost to soft collapses. One entry reads simply, "Graveyard soil won't hold." They tried to pour stone footing. It cracked overnight, then came the storm, not rain, not thunder, a dry storm like static in the air. The sky turned copper-colored at dusk, and the wind stopped. Not a single gust for 12 hours. Birds vanished, no one slept. Father Alden, assigned to bless the grounds, reported a terrible stillness in his diary. He was found 2 mornings later, standing knee-deep in a trench, unmoving, just staring, his cassock soaked in salt water. No one knew how it had gotten there. And yet, the church persisted. By spring of 1854, the cemetery opened its gates. 15 graves had already been filled, most from the almshouse ward, unclaimed, their names forgotten, their stones plain. A priest stood at each burial. No family, no flowers, just whispered Latin and a shovel. The chapel was simple stone walls, no windows, only a single brass cross above the altar. Inside, it always smelled faintly of matches, though no candles were ever lit. They built an ossuary beneath it. But no one speaks of what went in. The first public funeral occurred on June 3rd. A merchant, hung for counterfeiting, buried at dawn. His casket buckled before the interment splintered like driftwood, despite dry weather. Witnesses heard a knocking from inside. They said it was the wood settling, but something wasn't right. Within 2 months, the cemetery received 7 more bodies. 2 were infants. 1 was a nun. By October, the wind had changed. It now spiraled, never blowing straight across the hill, but coiling in slow, invisible circles. The grass began to grow sideways. Parish staff complained of dizziness when walking uphill. The bishop ordered a perimeter fence, not for the living, for containment. Then came the dogs. 3 strays were found dead near the south gate. No wounds, no rot, just curled on their sides like they'd been put to sleep. Their eyes were open. 1 still had dirt on its snout. A report from Father Trask reads, the animals had not been poisoned, and yet they had the look of death by acceptance, as if they'd seen something and simply stopped. There is a photo, sepia-toned and warped by time, of 4 priests standing by the western graves. Behind them, if you look closely, is a shape not human, not full. It's where the soil dips just slightly into a bowl. No grave was ever dug there. And yet, it sinks. Every year, a little more. Locals began to whisper. They said the cemetery was never empty, not even at night. That you could hear singing if you stood outside the gate long enough. Not in English, not in any tongue known to the ears. The church denied this. They issued statements, sermons, reassurances. But by 1857, Providence Hill was used only in silence. No more public funerals. No ceremonies. Only carts that arrived at dawn and left unmarked. No. Records remain of who was buried after that year. Only a number. 214. No names. No dates. Just a count marked in red ink on a ledger too damaged to open. The cemetery had become a mouth, and the church, whether out of obedience or fear, kept feeding it. There are still foundation stones on the edge of the property, covered in moss, carved with crosses so worn they resemble wounds. If you visit at dusk, they say the wind will stop again, and if it does. If the air stills and the light turns copper, do not speak, because it wasn't the ground, it was sanctified. It was something beneath it. The ground turned silver when the sun hit it just right. Not the bright silver of metal, but pale, dusted, like salt rubbed into old skin. By late autumn, the first 30 bodies had been placed. Rows of simple wooden crosses marked their graves, painted white with lime to keep the insects away. No stone, no names, just lines of weathered timber, standing like sentries against the wind. And then they began to rot, not slowly. Within days, the wood blackened at the base. Paint flaked upward like peeling skin. On several, the horizontal arms drooped downward, as if from weight. Though nothing touched them, caretakers replaced them. Twice, then stopped. It was the headstones that raised questions. Carved granite, cut from quarries inland, brought by horse cart and laid at the eastern line. They stood tall, solid, unmarked, except for the date and the Latin cross, but each cracked cleanly. No chips, no erosion. Just a single perfect split. Always vertical, never at an angle, never across, always down the middle. By the third week, all of them had fractured. Even replacements brought from a different stone cut. Same pattern, same line. There are records of these fractures in the church maintenance ledger. A single note written in red, too precise for nature. May need to reconsecrate soil. That was the first time the church doubted the ground. Then the water came. It didn't flood. It seeped. A thin film appeared at the edges of grave pits. Sticky, clear, with a faint shimmer. The men assumed it was groundwater, but they were miles from the river, and no other part of the hill was wet. Father Alden requested samples be taken. They were sent to the local chemist. The report came back marked irregular saline presence, a type of brine, high in sodium, containing particles not native to Connecticut. Soil. One grave digger, Daniel Rusk, dipped his hand in it. He described it as cold. Not temperature cold, but unnaturally still, like touching sleep. Later that night, he developed a rash on his forearm. Red welts, dry around the edges. They formed a line from wrist to elbow, as if drawn. He left within a week, never returned. By winter, the water had grown thicker. It clung to the base of the crosses. Coated boots left behind a residue. Filmy and gray. That could not be scrubbed away. The cemetery staff began to rotate weekly. None stayed long, and those who did began to complain of something else. A sound. It wasn't speech. Not exactly. One night in December, caretaker Joseph Mullen reported hearing movement beneath the ground. At first, he thought it was settling, but it continued for hours. Not a shift, a pulse, like a lung, like breathing. He brought it to the bishop. The bishop dismissed it. Suggested stress. Joseph didn't argue, But the next morning, he was gone. His lantern was found upright beside the chapel door, still warm, and the soil, near the third row of graves, was wet again. Salt deposits began appearing in the frost. White rings on the earth, perfectly round, often centered around the oldest headstones. They faded by midday, but reappeared the next morning, slightly. Larger. There are photos in the diocesan archive. Grainy, indistinct, but the shapes are clear. They weren't natural. No botanist could explain them. One letter from Yale, preserved with a rusted paperclip, describes them as mineral rings consistent with evaporative blooms, though the pattern suggests deliberate formation. One priest circled that sentence in black ink, underlined deliberate, and then under it. But who would do that? By early January, the chapel interior began to change. The wood around the altar softened. Moisture clung to the underside of the pews. Salt crystals grew along the stone seams, pushing into the grout like veins. The brass cross tarnished into a sickly green. They tried to clean it. It returned by morning. Visitors rare, as they were spoke of headaches, nausea. A few claimed the light inside the chapel seemed to bend, that the walls tilted slightly inward, but the building passed every inspection. On paper, it was sound, yet the records show the parish held fewer and fewer services. On the hill, no more dawn masses, no funerals after dark. A perimeter was quietly put in place. Not for the public, but for the clergy. By March, gravediggers wore gloves, not by policy, but choice. One man reported a sensation after handling wet soil. Not pain, just a tingling. That wouldn't stop, even after he'd washed. His left hand eventually lost feeling. No diagnosis, no inflammation, just a numbness that crawled to the shoulder by the year's end. He retired early. Nobody filled his place. There's an entry. Dated April 2 ND. From the new groundskeeper. A man named Ephraim Keller. It reads, "The water does not freeze, even in frost, even under moonlight. It glistens like glass. I do not trust it. This is not holy ground. I do not believe it ever was." That line was crossed out, but still legible. No one corrected him, and that's when the first statue collapsed. A stone angel, placed at the north entrance, found face down one morning. No cracks, no damage, just toppled, though its base remained anchored. When they lifted it, the earth beneath was soaked. Brine pooled in the indentations of the stone. Despite no rain for weeks. Father Trask refused to bless the statue again. That was the last recorded clerical act on Providence Hill. After that, only silence. But the ground didn't stop. It continued to weep, not in torrents, in drops, in slow, steady rivulets that collected at the edge of the graves and vanished by dawn. Never enough to flood, never enough to gather. Just enough to remind them. The salt remains to this day. Scattered in the soil, crusted in the cracks of the stone. Visitors say the ground feels different, heavier, like walking across something asleep. Something that doesn't want to be disturbed. And underneath it, all buried deeper than the coffins, something is leaking. The grass here is thinner, low to the ground, wiry, almost gray. Even the wind moves quieter at the center of the northern slope. Where the children were buried. They were not given names. In church records, the section is marked simply infans non baptizatus, infants not baptized, laid to rest in a narrow crescent of soil behind the main chapel wall. 10 unmarked plots, no flowers, no relics, just the soft impression of earth, gently lowered, carefully forgotten. In the spring of 1861, Sister Miriam asked to pray for them. She was young then, only 26, a quiet presence in the convent. Born in Wales, moved to New Haven at age 14. She'd taken her final vows just 2 years prior. She was known for her stillness. Not silence, stillness. She listened more than she spoke, and when she prayed, she did so with her eyes closed, lips unmoving, as though hearing something from far away. When the head priest asked her why she chose that part of the graveyard, she simply said, because they didn't get to hear a voice. So she was given permission. 3 nights, dusk until dawn. She brought no lantern, no Bible, only her rosary and a small cloth to kneel on. The first night was clear, temperate, slight breeze. She walked out just after Vespers, head lowered, arms tucked into her sleeves. 2 sisters watched her from the dormitory window. They said she moved as if she knew the way. By morning, she returned, her expression unchanged, her habit flecked with dirt at the knees. She did not speak of what passed, nor was she asked. The second night, the temperature dropped. The sky clouded over, but no rain came. This time, no one saw her walk back. They found her already inside, sitting in the chapel, hands folded. When asked if all was well, she nodded. But something was different. She had not slept. Her eyes did not blink as often, and when she smiled, it didn't reach her cheeks. The third night was colder still. Sister Miriam departed at the same hour. But did not return. First, the others assumed she'd stayed to finish her vigil. But by mid-morning, concern had spread. She had never once disobeyed curfew. 2 sisters and Father Trask went to look for her. They found her kneeling exactly where the 10th grave should have been. Not on top of it, not beside it. In line with it, her eyes were open, unblinking. Her lips moved in a slow, rhythmic pattern. No sound came out. Her rosary was wrapped so tightly around her left hand that the skin beneath had bruised. 2 of the beads were broken. 1 was missing entirely. She did not respond when they called her name. Father Trask reached out to lift her shoulder. And that's when he pulled back, because her skin was cold. Not frost cold, not damp, but vacant. He described it later as feeling like linen left in a drawer too long. They carried her inside. She did not resist. She never spoke again. Doctors were called. 3 over the course of a week. 1 believed it was catatonia. Another, trauma-induced aphasia. The last, exhaustion. But none of them could explain the movement of her mouth, because it never stopped, even in sleep, even while feeding. Her lips kept forming words. Always the same pattern. 4 syllables, then pause. Then again, attempts to transcribe it failed. It didn't match any known liturgy, and yet it sounded like prayer, not a chant, not a plea. Something older, more resigned. After her 10th day in silence, she was moved to the convent infirmary. She lived there for 42 more years, never once speaking, never walking again. She died in the spring of 1903, April 6. At the moment of her passing, the sister on duty reported a faint sound, like children exhaling. Her final breath was silent, but her lips had stopped moving. She was buried in the convent garden, far from Providence Hill. The only item placed in her casket was her rosary. The missing bead was never found. What remains are the journals. A small set of handwritten entries in her own script, kept the week before she began the vigil. 1 page in particular has been preserved by the Archdiocese. It reads, "I will speak where no one spoke. I will listen for what was never heard. If it answers, I will know what it wants." There is no other context. No mention of voices, no claim of vision, no confession of fear. Only that final line, "I will know what it wants." But no one ever asked if she did, because the morning she came back, she didn't come back alone. She was kneeling, breathing, but whatever remained in her eyes, was not Sister Miriam. The road to Providence Hill curved slowly, barely rising, barely falling, cut through elm and ash trees that no longer bloomed. It is silent before it disappears behind the chapel wall. And once you're past the bend, you cannot see the town again. On the morning of October 12, 1868, a funeral procession left the main cathedral in New Haven. They were burying Bishop Anthony Reardon, a quiet man, unmarried, nearly blind in one eye. He had served the diocese for over 40 years and spent his final days bedridden in the rectory above the crypt. His death was not sudden, nor scandalous. He died in sleep. At 9 a.m., the bell tolled. The casket, sealed in mahogany and draped with a black cloth, was lifted by 6 robed clergy and placed atop a wheeled carriage drawn by 2 black horses. Behind them walked 13 men. Each ordained, each holding a single white candle that was not to be lit until the grave was reached. Was tradition, a silent escort, wordless until the rites were spoken over the open earth. They left down the western road at 9:17. The cemetery was a 20-minute walk. They did not return. By 10 o'clock. The cathedral prepared for the secondary service. By 10:30. There was confusion. At 10:48, the first horse returned. It wandered into the courtyard alone. Sweat glistened on its coat. Its reins were still attached, trailing behind like a rope thrown into dark water. The second horse arrived 4 minutes later. Its harness was torn. The iron latch snapped as if by pressure from within. It did not respond to its name. That was when the church sent the first search party. 4 clergy and 2 laymen walked the same road. They found the cart within minutes. It was still upright. The coffin was gone. No marks in the dirt. No drag lines. No wheel misalignment. Just an empty carriage, its wheels stilled as if it had never moved, and scattered on the ground. Robes. Dozens of them, folded in unnatural angles, wrinkled at the sleeves, stiff. As if the bodies inside had vanished, not fallen. There were 13 in total. 13 black robes. 13 white candles. None of them lit. Each candle untouched, unburned, undisturbed. The wind did not lift them. A priest, Father Healy, was the first to touch one. He later wrote, there was no warmth, no sign of struggle, and the grass underneath them was flattened, but only beneath, not around. The procession had reached the cemetery. Of that, there was no doubt, but there were no footprints past the gate, just robes and quiet. The bishop's body was never recovered. Over the next 3 days, the church held prayers. They called in riders. No tracks were found. No belongings were claimed. No horses were missing from any nearby farms. And yet, the chapel door was found ajar the next morning. It had not been opened in weeks. Inside, nothing was taken, nothing disturbed, but a smell lingered. Faint, bitter, like wet cloth left in the sun. It faded after an hour. No one confessed to entering. But something wasn't right. The cemetery's groundskeeper, Tomas Delaney, resigned that week. His resignation letter, hastily written, misspelled in several places. Includes the following line: I no longer feel the wind up there, not even when the trees move. And another: the graves are wrong. The ones with names seem quiet. It's the ones without. He never finished the sentence. A second search team was deployed the following week. They combed the surrounding woods, searched under tree roots, dug in soft earth, but there was nothing. No casket, no bones, no cloth. Just the quiet. One priest claimed to have seen a figure standing near the crest of the hill just before sunrise. A silhouette in black, tall, facing the chapel, not moving. When he approached, it vanished behind the marble angel, but the statue had shifted. No longer faced the road. It now looked directly into the children's graves. No one remembered turning it. Bishop Weirden's name was carved into an empty tomb, but there was no body inside, only a pool of water at the bottom. Salt water. Since then, no other processions have entered the cemetery on foot. Bodies are delivered quietly, early, by cart, by hired hands. Never clergy. The church will not admit this, but there is a record, a ledger tucked inside the cathedral's back archives. Leather-bound, unlabeled. It begins with a list of dates and abruptly stops at October 12, 1868. Beneath the date is a line. Procession did not return. And beneath that ... we do not walk the dead to Providence anymore. We send them. Of the 13 priests, None were ever seen again. Their names were not read aloud. No morning masses were held. The church called it an unresolved tragedy and moved on. But Father Healy kept the candle from that day, UNLIT, he kept it hidden in a drawer wrapped in linen. No one knew until after his death. When they opened it, the wick had blackened as if something had burned from within. There are still questions. Still rumors. Some say the robes were never truly empty, that if you knelt beside them long enough, you could feel warmth, hear breath, that they're not robes at all, but skins, and the funeral. Never really ended. The rectory overlooked the eastern edge of Providence Hill, stone built, moss softened, 2 narrow windows, 1 lamp on the porch that never flickered, even in wind. Inside, everything was wood, dark, warm, quiet. Father Thomas Connolly took residence in the spring of 1869. He was not a young man, nor old, just small-framed, precise, always seen with a black fountain pen tucked into the lining of his sleeve. He kept records. Not just parish logs and confessional tallies, but personal journals. Meticulous, daily, undated, but numbered. First surviving volume is labeled simply Volume I. Beneath. Its early entries are unremarkable. Reports on parish finances, supply orders, a note about his poor digestion. But on the 4th page, the tone shifts. He writes, "The ground sings at night, not a hymn, not a song, but something. It isn't heard by ear, only by thought." He describes dreams. He begins waking at the same hour, 3:11 a.m. always. Without sound. The journal pages take on a rhythm, short, clipped lines, almost verse. One entry reads, "There is a sound beneath the floorboards, a kind of weeping. It does not ask for help." He marks that entry with a small circle. There are dozens of these circles across the margins, always beside the same phrase, the weeping beneath. At first, it was metaphor, but then it began to change. By August, Connolly had started sealing the chapel door before dusk. Not for theft, not for weather, but for containment. His notes mention a drop in temperature during evening prayer, a smell in the walls, like brine, a taste in the wine, salted, spoiled. He stopped serving communion after sundown, and then he began hearing voices. He describes them as indistinct, distant, never louder than breath, always from the corners of the room, always from behind closed doors. But something wasn't right, because the voices spoke in Latin. Not ecclesiastical Latin, not the liturgical cadence he'd learned in seminary. It was older, staggered, partial, not spoken, recalled. He writes, "It is not a voice made for others. It is a voice turned inward, praying, but not to God." The next pages are smudged, ink blurred by moisture. He begins sleeping in the sacristy, claims the bedroom walls have grown too loud. And then the entries stop for 3 days. They resume. The handwriting has changed. Still his pen, but smaller, pressed harder into the page. The letters curl in on themselves. He writes, "They gather at the floorboards now. I hear them touch the beams. There are 5. I do not know if they are the same ones each night." In the corner, a new mark appears. Not a circle, a spiral dot. It appears 12 times in the next 4 pages. The next entry contains no words, just a series of Latin phrases. Short, clipped, ungrammatical, non serviam, suboculi, silentium vocator, and then non-ego. On the facing page, 1 sentence. "They have begun to speak Latin. I have not taught them." That was the last entry, October 2nd, 1870. The next morning, the chapel bell rang once at 4:12 a.m. No one had pulled the rope. A visiting deacon found the front door of the rectory wide open. The lamp on the porch had gone out. Inside, nothing was broken, nothing missing, but the bed had not been slept in. The pages of volume I beneath were still open on the desk. And across the floor, footprints Not muddy, not bloody, salt. Fine dash grained, damp, marking a single path from the desk to the back door, but only one set. There were no return prints. Father Connolly was never found. No note, no disturbance, no report. The diocese declared it a disappearance by natural causes, age, overwork, but the journal was kept. Remained sealed in the church archive under restricted access, only viewed by clerics with written permission from the bishopric. Of the 5 who have read it in full, 3 left the clergy within the year. One. The last. Left a single line in his resignation. The words are not his. There are rumors that the house still smells faintly of salt, that the window shutters close themselves in high wind, that if you sleep inside the rectory. Alone. You wake at 3:11, and sometimes, only sometimes, there's a sound from beneath the floorboards. Not weeping, not anymore, whispered Latin, in a voice you recognize. The sky over Providence Hill never brightened the way it did elsewhere. Even in summer, even at noon, there was a film to the air, as if the light had been strained through old water. By 1913, the cemetery had been unused for nearly 4 decades. There were no new graves, no formal services, just caretakers on rotation, paid quietly, moved quietly, never from the local parish, never more than one at a time. The chapel stood locked. Its bell rusted through the clapper. A bird's nest lodged in the hollow where the candle rack once sat, but the ground remained open, and something beneath it was not still. They never made a formal announcement. No sermons, no press, no regional council. But on June 9th, 3 men arrived at the bishopric carrying a red valise sealed in wax. Witnesses described them only as visiting clergy. No names, no regional dialect, no record of how they arrived. The bishop at the time. Alban Lucian. Received them in private. And after 22 minutes, behind a closed door, a letter was issued to the Vatican registry. It read, "We concur. The ground is compromised. It is no longer fit for holy rite. Permission to initiate containment protocol granted." The original order had been written in Latin, black ink, no signature. Only a crest, not the papal seal, not any known order. A variation of the keys of St. Peter, but with the keys bent downward. The order was precise. Pour no less than 26 inches of concrete across the full bounds of Providence Hill. Dissolve all church records relating to interments prior to 1880. Burn vestments. Decommission sacramentals. Remove the tabernacle. Close all paths to the children's graves. No explanation was to be given. The next morning, the workers arrived. 24 men, secular, not clergy, all paid in cash. They brought lime, rebar, gravel, water tanks, mixing drums. Chapel was the first to fall. Its stone walls were shattered inward. The altar dismantled piece by piece. A crucifix removed from the nave was reportedly found to be hollow. Inside were folded cloth scraps. Salt stained, brittle with age. No one claimed knowledge of how they had gotten there. Then came the graves. Each headstone was lifted and placed on a cart. The names scratched out with acid. Some resisted. The stone cracked sideways, splintering without sound. They left the children's graves for last. It took them 3 days to pour over the crescent. The concrete hardened unevenly. In places it bubbled. In others, it receded before drying. One of the men. Marcus B. ILT. Refused to return after the first night. He claimed he'd seen something in the setting mix. Not a body, not movement. A face pressed upward from beneath. Not emerging, not struggling. Just watching. He didn't come back the next day. Neither did the supervisor. His bunk was found undisturbed, but a circle of salt surrounded the edges of his cot, poured deliberately, 1 inch wide, closed at both ends. There was no investigation. The final pour took place on June 19th. No prayer was spoken. No cross was raised. Only silence. And then, the fire dot at 3:45 a.m. A group of priests brought 6 crates to the old vestry. Inside, baptismal records, funeral rites, sacramental logs, names of donors, birth ledgers, last confessions, wedding notices. Every recorded trace of Providence Hill's sacred function was placed into the furnace. Pages blackened, ink ran, ash gathered in the corners like snowfall. One record refused to burn. A small journal, leather-bound, water-damaged, later identified as belonging to Father Colonial. Its pages could not be ignited, even when soaked in lamp oil. So they buried it. At the edge of the concrete slab, beneath a rock that had never been marked, facing north. No one has admitted why. After that, it was finished. The hill was declared decommissioned. The local paper printed a single line: former cemetery land now sealed by diocesan directive. Future use pending. But there would be no future use. The soil underneath was still alive. In the years that followed, grass never grew over the concrete. No roots, no moss, just dust. Wind did not gather there. Snow did not hold. Rainwater vanished within minutes, though no drainage was laid. They posted no signs, but people knew. Children avoided it. Dogs stopped barking near it. Even birds circled wider when they flew above. A teacher from New Haven visited in the fall of 1915. She took photographs. In one, her shadow bends across the edge of the concrete slab. But in the image, developed a week later. There is another shadow. Directly behind her. Too tall. Too narrow. No one else was there. The photo was quietly removed from the parish archive, but a copy survives, scratched in pencil on its back. They asked for silence, but it was already listening. In the decades since, the Vatican has never referenced the cement order. Again, but archival scholars note that no other site, before or after, was ever sealed in this way. Not even those declared desecrated. Only Providence Hill. Only there, and under that gray slab of silence, something still listens. The cement above Providence Hill had dulled by 1955. No longer gray, no longer smooth, just a sun-cracked sheet of forgotten memory. Weeds died at its edge. Roots never broke through. Even time moved slower here. Like the ground refused to rot. But maps didn't remember what people did. And one morning in May, a municipal crew from the New Haven Water Authority was sent to begin exploratory drilling for a planned southern line expansion. They arrived just after 8 a.m. 5 men, 1 truck, a vertical auger rated for shallow bedrock. They had no idea what lay beneath. No record labeled the slab. No warning from the city's registry. Just a shaded area on an old zoning chart marked non-developable. They assumed it meant landfill. By 8:40, the drill was turning. At 9:07, they hit resistance. Not stone, not clay. Hollow. A sudden give, like bone splitting under pressure. The drill didn't break, but the sound it made. W-A send single quotes T mechanical. It echoed. One of the workers. Donnie Fells, age 26. Reported it first. He said the vibration wasn't right. Not normal tremor. Not feedback. It sounded like we touched a room. The foreman told them to keep going. At 9:11, they broke through. The drill passed through a thin seam of concrete, then into open space. Quiet rush of air. Then screaming. It came from inside the pipe. Not static. Not compression shriek. Screaming. One long, high-pitched note. No breath. No decay. As if something below had been waiting with its mouth open. The sound only lasted 7 seconds. But no one moved. Not even the birds above made a sound. Then the pipe thumped. As if something had struck it. Once. From the inside. And that's when he heard it. Donnie's cousin. Stephen. The team's youngest technician. 19. Clean-cut. Nephew of father. Jerome. He had been crouched near the intake valve When the pipe struck, he jerked upright and said, "Did you hear the Latin?" No one responded. No one had. He repeated himself. They said vidia iam venientem, over and over, like a whisper, but under the metal. See him coming, and he walked toward the boar. He didn't run, didn't panic, just moved. One of the crew shouted at him to stop, but he didn't even look back. He stepped over the edge of the dig line, into the recess the drill had made, then dropped out of view. They thought he'd slipped, but when they reached the hole, there was no sign of him, no shout, no thud, no cry, just nothing. The space below the drill was too narrow for descent. No ladder was lowered, They called emergency services, By the time responders arrived, there was only a faint hum inside the bore. Heat, like wet stone. The site was shut down, barricaded, sealed. That night, the other 4 men met at the foreman's home. No one said much, but all agreed something answered him. They went back the next morning before sunrise. The hole was still open, but there was something at the edge. Metal, not pipe, not tool, but bent iron. A small crucifix, half melted, its chain broken. One arm of the cross twisted upward. Father Jerome was brought in for identification. He held it in his hands for less than 10 seconds, then asked to be alone. When he came back out, he refused to speak. He resigned from the parish the following week. The borehole was capped. Concrete was poured, 12 inches thick, reinforced with rebar, but the new cement cured wrong. It never hardened. Every time they poured, the center softened, like something exhaled beneath it. After 4 attempts, the order was given to abandon the trench. The official record calls it a geological fault, too unstable for development. But the city surveyor's copy of the blueprints, recovered decades later, has a note in the margin, handwritten, small, barely visible in pencil. It was never supposed to open. Beneath that, another line, underlined twice. He still speaks Latin. The area remains unmarked. It does not appear on any modern survey, but workers say the ground is warm, even in winter. And if you stand there at sunrise, some swear you can hear metal ringing. But not from tools, from beneath. The diocesan archive of New Haven sits underground. Beneath what was once a Catholic grammar school, decommissioned in the early 70s. Its halls are narrow, no windows, just flickering fluorescence above rows of steel shelving and gray box files. The temperature stays fixed, 49 degrees. Always, even in summer. And it was here, in March of 1982, that Evelyn Marsh began her temporary assignment. She was 39, a contract archivist, soft-spoken, never married, a graduate of Yale's Library Sciences. Programmed. Her job was straightforward. Digitize the handwritten records of the Archdiocese. Mainly burial ledgers, baptismal rolls, marriage registries, all spanning from the mid-1800s to the 1920s. Each volume, logged by hand, ink over parchment, faded notations in Latin. Most had not been touched in over half a century. She worked alone. Her desk was located in a far corner, past the sacramental storage room. The only sound was the microfilm scanner and the low hum of the lights overhead. For the first few weeks, she made steady progress. But on the 17th day, she opened a box that didn't match any entry on the registry list. It had no label, just a strip of black cloth. Where the spine should be. Inside were 17 folders, each one marked with the same 3-letter code, PRH. No explanation, no key. The first folder contained a single document, a burial index. But unlike the others, these names had no dates. No church name, no officiant, no next of kin. Just rows of initials, followed by Latin phrases. Signed confession, sub moro, non sanctificatus, without confession. Beneath the wall, not sanctified. They weren't just unrecorded, they were deliberately omitted. And that's when she saw it. Page after page, Entries were lined in red pencil ... crossed out once, then blacked over entirely. But some names had been missed. Light enough. To read, she transcribed what she could. One stuck out. T. Connolly, found at the floor, no right permitted, returned beneath. She paused. She remembered the name. She had scanned a letter from a Father Connolly weeks earlier. It mentioned a journal. Something about a voice beneath the altar. She went back through her logs, looked for the original ledger entry. There wasn't. 1. Connolly's final mass was listed, but no death, no burial, just an abrupt absence. She checked his personnel file. It was sealed. The next day, she returned to the PRH folders. Inside the 5th folder, she found something else. A report, stamped in Latin. Privatus, burials that were never recorded. 6 pages, hand-typed, dated 1914. The author is unknown. The text references a stretch of unmarked ground west of the infant graves and includes a list of estimated counts. 70-3 names, all redacted. Each page ends with the same phrase: do not enter where concrete has been laid. She read it 3 times. Then printed a copy and placed it in a new file marked anomalous. Later that week, she submitted her internal memo, a single-page summary titled Unregistered Interments, Providence Hill. She cited missing names, contradictory rights, incomplete registry volumes, the existence of sealed files with no archival origin. She filed it under standard review. The next day, the file was gone. Her inbox was empty, and her office light wouldn't turn on. Building maintenance claimed there was no outage. Later that night, a security guard walking past the archive floor noticed something strange. Light was visible under the door to room 3B, but Evelyn's shift had ended hours earlier. When he knocked, no one answered. The door was locked from the inside. He called the floor supervisor. They forced it open. Inside, Evelyn was seated at her desk, upright, eyes open, hands folded. She looked peaceful, almost asleep, but her lips were blue. There were no signs of struggle, no marks, no bruising, no blood, no sign of a break-in, no spilled chemicals, no gas leak, nothing removed. But she was not breathing. The coroner listed it as asphyxiation by unknown cause. Her lungs were clear. Her oxygen levels showed deprivation, but there was no obstruction, no pressure, just a stopping, as if she had stopped breathing on her own, as if something told her to, and she had listened. The room had no ventilation issues, no faulty fixtures. But in the report's margin, the inspector wrote one line: salt residue on floorboards beneath chair. An autopsy was conducted. Traces of particulate were found in her nasal cavity. They weren't dust. They weren't mold. It was mineral. Salt. The church never released her report. Her copies were seized. The burials that were never recorded. File vanished from all indexes. Her family was told it was a stress-induced condition. Archival accident. But something wasn't right. Because 1 week later, a temporary archivist named Linda Alvarez was brought in to finish Evelyn's workload. On her first day, she noticed the microfilm scanner still had a reel loaded. She played it back. It was from 2 days before Evelyn died. The reel flickered. A scan of the redacted folder. Then ... movement. A single frame, almost UNNOTICEABL, but in the reflection of the scanner glass, a figure. Behind Evelyn. Too tall, too narrow. No facial features, just black, standing motionless in the frame's edge, facing her. Linda shut the machine off. She didn't return them. Next day. No one digitized the rest of the PRH files. The Vatican ordered a final audit in 1984. All physical copies were boxed and sealed, the contents labeled non-canonical investigative materials. They were sent to Rome, but one box was held behind by mistake, stored in a utility room marked Sacristy Overflow. It was found in 1991, behind a cabinet. Inside, Evelyn single quotes, S handwritten notes, and at the bottom of the folder, one posted, penciled in soft graphite. The dead were not lost. They were placed, but I think the ground wants them back. The note ends there, but beneath it faint, almost invisible one word, repeated 3 times. Respira, respira, respira. Breathe. The fence around Providence Hill was reinforced in 1989. Steel posts, barbed wire, motion lights every 20 yards. By then, the city had long forgotten what the land once held, but the church hadn't, and neither had the brown dot. In June of 1994, an environmental inspector named Terrence Lyle was assigned to survey runoff levels near the south perimeter. He arrived early, before heat could rise off the stone. Birds were already absent, not flying, not perched, just gone. He noted it, then walked the eastern edge where the concrete curved toward the drainage slope, and that's where he saw the first one. A bloom, white, powdered, spread wide across. The surface like an opening flower. Not mold, not ash salt, but shaped too carefully, too symmetrical, crystallized in a pattern, almost circular. He took a sample, logged the reading, left quietly. By the end of July, there were 19 more. They didn't spread. They appeared overnight. Always at dawn. Always facing east. Local kids sneaking out after curfew were the first to notice the flickering. They thought it was flashlights or campfires, but when they climbed the cemetery wall and looked across the slab. They saw something else. Candles. Dozens, all low to the ground, tiny, unmoving, no holders, no source. Just flame, floating inches above the salt. One girl. Rielle, Meyer, age 10. Saw them from her bedroom window. She lived 2 blocks away. Had never been told what Providence Hill used to be, but she remembers it clearly. They looked like little prayers, but no one was saying them. She told her mother. Her mother didn't listen, but the next night, Ariel came back to the window, and the lights were there again. Same number, same places, but this time they were closer. Her window faced away from the cemetery wall, but the lights had moved, past the perimeter, past the fence, along the outer slope. She didn't look again after that. Within 2 weeks, city workers came to assess the fence. They found the steel pitted, corroded, in strips. As if something had licked the metal clean. Maintenance reports noted high salinity, but couldn't explain its source. The surrounding soil was neutral, and rainfall had been light. A new alarm system was installed, motion-sensitive floodlights, but on the night of August 19th, they triggered 34 times. Always between 2 o'clock and 2:16 a.m. Security footage showed nothing, but the lights fired in sequence, starting near the wall, then moving inward toward the center slab. The final light, the one above the concrete cross buried under rubble, flashed twice, then failed. The next morning, a new bloom was found, larger, 5 feet wide, salt-crusted, along the cracks. But this time, it was shaped like a hand. The church was contacted. No reply came. The local parishioners were told it was a chemical reaction, a latent result of drainage minerals interacting with alkaline cement. But something wasn't right, because the blooms began repeating. Same shapes, same orientation, same formation sequence, as if something beneath was trying to form them, not randomly, not environmentally, but deliberately. Then, in late September. The birds returned. Only one kind. Grackles. Thousands. They didn't fly over. They didn't land. They circled for hours, days. A black ribbon of movement above the slab. Then abruptly. They scattered, and in the silence that followed came the sound from the fence post nearest the chapel ruins. A faint crack, then another. Concrete doesn't shift easily, especially after 70 years. But that night, a thin line appeared across the largest slab. Not natural, not fractured. Drawn. It curved west, toward the infant graves. and stopped, but the salt kept growing. By October 5th, a third of the surface was coated pale white, dusted like frost. No one knew what it meant until someone noticed the pattern from above. Through drone footage analyzed weeks later. The blooms weren't random. They weren't flowers. They were letters. Latin. Inverted, as if carved from below. The visible portion read, "No light. Aperior. Do not open." The footage was deleted. The slab was coated with tar. The blooms haven't returned, but the birds haven't either. And sometimes just before dawn. If you walk the east wall, you can still see light, not flame, not flicker. Just a glow. Low, silent, constant, like someone beneath is still watching, still waiting. It was early spring. The trees above Providence Hill had not yet bloomed. Their branches were still black, still brittle, still pointing toward what lay below. Tobias Rigg arrived at 3:12 a.m. He had parked 2 blocks away, hauled the equipment by hand. One crate, one tripod, and a suitcase containing the drill. The fence had been cut earlier. He'd done it days before, slowly, quietly. He had studied the cemetery for almost a year. Forum posts, aerial maps, microfilm, screenshots from vanished archives. The name Evelyn Marsh came up once. So did the word salt. But what drew him in was the slab, concrete, nearly a century old, poured over ground that had once been sanctified and marked as unsuitable. No explanation, no official warnings, just absence. And to Tobias, that absence felt like permission. He called his project Exhumed. The live stream began at 3:27. Angle, wide, flashlight affixed to the tripod, grainy image, cold breath visible. He introduced himself, softly, almost respectful. "We're at Providence Hill tonight." The old sealed part. No grave markers, no names, no records, just poured stone. "Let's see what's underneath." Then he set the drill. It was hydraulic, high torque, rated for structural concrete. The sound was immediate, low, rhythmic, each pulse echoing back from the slab, as if the stone had lungs. The camera shook slightly. A few chat comments trickled in. Jokes, doubts, warnings. But Tobias didn't respond. He focused. By minute 11, the first flake of concrete peeled back, not cracked, lifted. Like something beneath had let go. He paused, leaned down, touched this exposed layer. And said, "It's warm." The temperature that night was 38 degrees. The slab should have been colder, but something wasn't right. He drilled again. More flakes. More lift. At minute 19, the camera caught something strange. Not on the slab, in the air, just above the frame. Dust. Falling from nowhere. White, powdered, slow. Tobias didn't notice at first. But viewers did. In the chat. "Is that ash? Why is it falling upward?" Then the screen shimmered. Not cut, not static, just trembled. Like heat rising from pavement. Only it was night. And there was no heat. Tobias looked up. "Did you hear that?" There was no sound on the feed. Just his breath and the drill. But Tobias kept staring past the camera, toward something none of us could see. He whispered, "It's under me," then smiled, almost small, almost sad. And resumed. Minute 34. The drill hit open air. A sudden drop. You could see it in the footage. Concrete crumbling downward like dry sugar. He leaned over, holding the flashlight. Then said, "It's not empty. It's full." The chat went silent, and that's when he heard it. Breathing. Not his own. Not wind. Something beneath. Inhaled once. Paused. And exhaled. Until the dust scattered sideways across the slab. The microphone crackled. Then silence. Minute 38. The screen dimmed slightly. Tobias stepped away from the hole, stared at it. And said one word. "Exciper." Latin. To receive. No one knew he spoke Latin. No one had ever heard him use the word before. and then he knelt, not, collapsed, not stumbled, knelt, as if waiting for something, as if receiving it. His lips moved, but no sound came. The camera trembled again, then froze, frame by frame. The last image was static, then, at minute 40-6, black, the feed went dead, police were alerted by a viewer. The footage was submitted. The coordinates traced, they arrived before sunrise, what they found was nothing, no man, no gear, no equipment. Just a hole, no more than 8 inches across, fresh, wet, and beside it, upright, carefully, 2 boots, worn, mud-caked, laces intact, still tied, still warm, but no feet, no blood, no sign of removal, no struggle, just the boots, and the hole, which, by the time they brought in lights, had sealed, completely, no crack, no debris, just fresh concrete, smooth, as if poured minutes earlier, except it wasn't wet, it was cold, solid, untouched, the police logged it as equipment abandonment. No foul play suspected, but the report filed by Officer Joanne Keller ends with an addendum, written in pen, not typed, it reads, I watched the hole seal. I didn't tell them. I smelled salt, and he was kneeling, as if something had waited a very long time. And beneath that, one final line, circled, underlined twice. Don't try again. Ill praying. The hill no longer has a name. The roads around it are still paved, still maintained, but they do not point to anything, no address. No signage, just a slope of green, steep with overgrowth, and a chain link fence the city won't admit to installing. There's no cemetery marked on state records, no burial logs, no deeds. The last file that referenced the site was removed in 2003, archived, sealed, and later shredded. But if you go there, if you find the incline where the trees thin out, you'll still feel it, the pressure, not downward, inward, as if the hill is not resting on the earth, but pulling towards something beneath it, a quiet gravity, still, patient, starved, and it begins with heat, in 2015. A climate researcher at Yale noticed an anomaly on satellite composites. Bloom, warm, narrow, linear, she thought it was a glitch, until she checked the next month, and the next, the signature wasn't fading, it was growing, each image, clearer than the last, each line brighter, more defined, until the shape could no longer be mistaken, letters, not English, Latin, in script, so old it predated Vatican II, cursive ecclesiastical, once used by exorcists, phonetic fragments of long-form absolution rites, but inverted, the words faced downward, not meant to be read by the living. But something wasn't right, because the language they formed wasn't a prayer, it was a command, not to protect, not to sanctify, but to submit, a phrase etched into heat, unmoving for years. Non petimus veniam, petimus iusa. We do not ask for mercy, we ask for orders. The church was contacted. No reply came. The diocese website for New Haven returned a 404 error. The address had been retired. The phone lines rerouted. One former cleric, who asked not to be named, said only this: it was never a cemetery. It was a holding place, not for bodies, for will. And then they buried obedience, because mercy wouldn't stay. We don't know what he meant, but the satellite data has remained consistent. Every spring, the heat signatures flare slightly. Every fall, they dim, as if something inside breathes, not constantly, just once a year, and always during Lent. Technicians have tried to send drones, but the signal scrambles. Batteries drain. Last year, a group of hobbyists attempted ground-penetrating radar. The equipment failed to read past 2 inches. Even though the concrete is measured at 12, the surface is cold, but underneath, something radiates, not warmth, intent, and if you stand close enough to the old fence, The one with the melted wells, rusted in lines that resemble scripture. You might hear a dot, not a sound, not a whisper, a presence, like a word waiting to be spoken, or obey dot, because that's what they buried dot, not sin, dot, not grief, not even faith, just one thing dot, pure, unsparing, blind dot, obedience dot, and now, whatever listened back then, may still be listening dot. It doesn't ask for confession dot, it doesn't offer absolution dot, it only waits. And we have already obeyed once. We poured the stone, we burned the names, we silenced the dead dot, and in doing so dot dot, we proved we could follow. Now, it's only a matter of time until it asks again, until the slab cracks, until someone kneels, not because they're afraid, not because they believe, but because something tells them to, and they do dot without question, because that's what heaven looks like when it has no mercy left to give dot in burying their mistakes. They buried something older than doctrine. The church was never built to contain this kind of obedience dot dot, only to obey it, and perhaps that's why they covered it in stone, not to protect us, but to make sure nothing ever came out. Next, the orphan bells of St. Elouise, where no child was ever officially born.